Watch Symposium. I'm Austin, and this is the second in a series of custom videos for David. If you haven't seen part one, link in the description, check it out. We looked at his current 5-piece collection. In this video, we're going to look at the details about these watches. So David writes, the Grand Seiko, gently used, and Blancpain, new, were purchased on the gray market with box and papers at about a 40% discount. That's good you got a discount on those pieces because likely you could get out and break even if you ever want to sell one of those pieces. I got the Tudor on the gray market at list with box papers and the manufacturer's warranty. The two Rolex Oyster Perpetuals, no box, no papers, were purchased from a reputable online seller with limited warranties in the low 4,000s and have both appreciated a fair amount since then. They're going for 5,000 to 6,000, so they've gone up about 1,000 to 2,000 since you've purchased them. All right, he continues, I have really enjoyed my collection as it has a variety of functions, case designs, and appearances. As I have a wrist on the smaller side, all of them wear really well except the larger GS. All right, put a pin in that. This isn't the first time he talks about the size issue with the Grand Seiko. As I have been working from home for almost a year, I often find myself switching watches over the course of the day just to keep things interesting. And as I like to wear a watch to bed, the lume on the Blancpain and Tudor are in particular appreciated. The Tudor is my beater, and I've taken it hiking and camping a number of times. The Blancpain is a level up in finish, movement, and depth rating, and it has a date and is a nice complement to the Yachtmaster, which is, of course, the all-arounder for both casual and dress occasions, particularly for me in the 37mm size. Now, with 5 watches, I find myself wearing the Grand Seiko and Rolex Oyster Perpetual less and less, perhaps because the Yachtmaster provides the wonderful Rolex case feel on the wrist, matched with a gleaming quality similar to the Grand Seiko, which I must say is stunning to look at when I wear it. I will also say that the GS is a bit large for my wrist and the thickest watch by far. Okay, second time he's mentioned the GS as being a little bit too big. Also, my son is only 14 at the moment, so I do wear his Oyster Perpetual from time to time. It's a stunner, so my OP feels expendable at the moment. While your son is going to grow up, he's going to take his OP, you're going to be left without one. So I'll tell you right now, you might want to think about holding on to that OP. Also, you bought his OP for his bar mitzvah, and that prompted you to get yours. So there's that kind of roundabout connection to his youth through your OP, and you might have the start of an interesting family tradition there, and that would be kind of nice for him to have his OP. You know, you'll probably will your OP to him, he'll inherit that. That'll be a nice story for his son. You know, this is the OP that I got at my bar mitzvah, prompted my dad to get his OP. This is grandpa's Oyster Perpetual, so be careful there, all right? So I'm thinking about selling the GS and OP 36mm or trading them 2 for 1. And he writes, I know, because I always advised against the 2-for-1 deals. I'm thinking perhaps a polar dial Rolex Explorer 2 circa P serial. And so he's probably, I think later on he talks about changing straps. So I think he wants a Holes case, solid and link bracelet, Explorer 2, so that would be a late A P serial, K serial, or early Y serial. He says it would allow me to get a little cash back in my pocket, and this would also allow me to retain a Rolex in the trade as well as still have the GMT function of the Grand Seiko. It would also replace the GS's white dial in the collection. Very well thought out, absolutely. And I think that's a great idea. We're gonna definitely talk about that. While I'm fortunate enough to purchase another watch, I feel more compelled to consolidate the collection. So I read that as the trade's not really about freeing up funds. It's more about just keeping the collection at about the right size. That said, I have expressed an interest in either a GMT Master 2 or an Explorer at my authorized dealer, and he said he will keep an eye out for them as I did purchase the Yachtmaster and one of the Oyster Perpetuals from his company. All right, well, don't hold your breath. Might be a bunch of hot air, but if one does come through, it's probably going to be the Explorer because you told him you're interested in 2 watches, and if he thinks he can satisfy you with the lesser one, that's probably the one you're going to get. He'll probably save the GMT Master 2 for someone that specifically requested that. If I were you, I would call him back and say, I've already got the no date Oyster Perpetual you sold me, so I'm just going to tell you right now, I think I'm going to pass on the Explorer. Can you just keep me on the list for the GMT Master 2? Another option is trading them towards a JLC Reverso with a bit of cash in my pocket. This would introduce a more formal dress watch into the collection, a different shape, and it is an icon. Well, yeah, it's an icon, but who cares? I feel like that's not you talking. I feel like that's something you've gotten from other people. Do you really want a GLC Reverso? I would ask yourself, do you need a dress watch? All right, do you wear a suit a lot? Do some of your watches work with a suit well enough? All right, if so, you can just stick with those. If you're one of those guys that you just have to have the proper watch for a suit, okay, all right, JLC Reverso. That's not to say you can't wear a JLC Reverso without a suit, but I just can't see going out of your way to add a dress piece if you've already got something that you've already said, the Yachtmaster, works well with a suit. And one of the things I like about your collection is the wearability of all the pieces. You're not going to find that in the JLC Reverso, but the Reverso, depending on what you get, is going to be kind of interesting. I mean, you can find sort of 2-in-1 watches with the Reverso with different dials on either side, and it's basically 2 watches in one. Those are pretty interesting, some cool complications. I don't think a JLC is going to be very wearable. It's not going to be as versatile. You're going to have to be careful with it. Do you really need a dress watch? Some people would say if you want to go hot horology, just cough up the money, go for something like a Lange or a Patek. That's probably what I would do. But I'm sort of biased because I'm not much for the Reverso, not much for watches that are square or rectangular. I like round watches. I like metal bracelets on my watches, wearable watches, watches that I can wear in a pool. So that's not something I would go with. And to trade one of your Rolexes to get a JLC, which are kind of soft, yeah, I don't know if I would go that route. I think the Explorer 2 is a much better option. He continues, so Austin, let me know what you think of the collection and your suggestions regarding a future move. He actually wrote back and he included some extra information, and let's read that. He says, the GS has a very high level of quality, particularly the indices and hands, which make it very seductive to look at. But it is simply too large at 40 millimeters on my wrist and very thick at 14 plus millimeters. Third time he's talked about it, so we're having some serious issues with the size of that GS, no matter how nice it is. That said, it does work better when I have a strap on it, and it's an easy swap because of the drilled lugs, and maybe that's why he's thinking of going P serial or around the P serial for the Explorer 2 to get those lug holes, all right? He says, I used to travel a lot before COVID, and I still have overseas clients, so a GMT function is and would be useful. And then he wraps up with this. This is all to say there are no reasons, financial or otherwise, to make any moves, just perhaps a little restless over the GS and Rolex OP and their place in the collection. I think the number of pieces is about right, so looking for your sage advice on sharpening the current collection and what might be a piece worth considering to add down the road. Lastly, my son thinks I would be a dope to sell a Rolex. I agree with your son, and I would counsel against selling that Oyster Perpetual because, like I said, he's going to take his, you'll have yours. You have that connection with your son through that watch, and you can always sell it at a later date. It's holding its value. It's going up in value, and I have a feeling those 36 millimeter 116 000s are, especially with those interesting dials that they're never going to put on the OP again, they're going to probably go up in value in the future, even more so. They're going to be probably more appreciated. And I think we've seen the form of the current Oyster Perpetual dial style crystallize. Okay, it's going to be interesting colors, but you're going to get, you know, the batons. You're not going to get the 369 dials anymore, the concentric dials. That's over. It's a thing of the past. So hold on to that. All right, before we get to the Grand Seiko, let me just say that I like Rolexes in a collection, but I think everybody needs what I usually call a high-end beater. Now that's a misnomer because you use a beater in situations where your watch might get a crazy amount of wear, and you're not going to want to do that with any expensive watch. So I think a better term for it would probably be a high-end casual wearing watch. And you don't always want to wear a Rolex watch. If you're at a business meeting and don't want to have a Rolex or a very ostentatious watch or a watch that screams, I've got disposable income, you know, maybe you don't want people reading that much into you. Rolex is a household name, so people see that on the dial. They're going to know you spent a lot of money on your watch. Things like Grand Seiko, Blancpain, Tudor, they are much more subtle. So it's good you have those in the collection. It's good to have that brand diversity as well. That's one of the strongest aspects of your collection. Now, a lot of people would say that you have that high-end casual wearing watch in the OP, all right, or your son's OP as well. And I would agree, but I think there's situations where you just don't want a Rolex, period, okay? People do check out the dials on Rolex watches. I've had it happen. I've had my arm up and I've seen their eyes on the watch, okay? Granted, it wasn't an Oyster Perpetual, but people check you out, right? And so it's great that you have the Tudor, the GS, and the Blancpain. I would want to keep at least one of those. Now, I would be inclined to keep the Blancpain because it's a higher end watch and it's a beautiful watch. It's got more functions than your Tudor, but it's a more expensive watch and you might feel overly protective of it. So I would want to keep that as my high-end beater, all right? My high-end casual wearing watch, let me phrase it like that. So if I were looking to get rid of pieces, I would probably want to keep the Blancpain and sell the Tudor and the GS, all right? But if you want to only sell one of them, then the GS would be the one to go because you've already said it yourself, you have issues with the size. And it feels to me like you're conflicted because it's a beautiful watch. It's got the GMT function, the beautiful white dial, but it's just too big. And so you like it, but it's just not fitting you. And so you nailed it when you brought up the Explorer 2, all right? Because it's going to give you the GMT function, the white dial, and it's a great wearing watch. It's 12.2 millimeters thick, and it's a 40 millimeter watch, but I've heard people refer to it as a 39 millimeter watch. I haven't broken out the calipers, so I can't say for sure, but let me say it just wears very nicely. It's a very thin watch. And, you know, a lot of people would say that it's not going to be as good as your Grand Seiko, all right? Object to object, then some people would say the Grand Seiko is going to be a better watch. It's a high beat. Hopefully it's going to be a better and more accurate watch, but really it depends on the watch. I mean, if I were to pluck a Grand Seiko like you have and a 16570 from the wild, I would expect that the Grand Seiko would be running more accurately, but it really depends on the watch. So again, if you're actually looking at the Explorer 2 and your Grand Seiko side by side, you would expect the Grand Seiko in terms of fit and finish to be better, but that might not always be the case, and that doesn't make for an overall better watch. I mean, when you say better, all right, there are many aspects you need to look at when it comes to a watch. The form, the function, the wearability and usability, the value and value retention, and the X factor, all right? And the wearability of your Grand Seiko is lacking. Of course, the X factor, I'd definitely go with a Rolex. Functionally speaking, you know, we can quibble about how much more accurate the high beat's going to be, but again, in practice, I don't think it's going to mean much. And again, I would expect your Grand Seiko to be better in terms of fit and finish. And so if you break out the loop and compare the two, I would expect it to be better. Does that mean you're not going to get a fantastically finished watch in the 16570? No, all right? So we can go back and forth about which is better, and it's not going to be just this is better. It's going to be this is better in this way, and this is going to be better in this way. But I tell you what, the Explorer 2 is definitely going to be better in the wearing experience, okay? Again, it's a 12.2 millimeter watch. It's thin, it's compact, and it wears really well for a 40 millimeter professional Rolex, and it's going to give you that dose of Rolex testosterone that I think your collection might be lacking a little bit. I haven't seen the comments, but the first 2 hours of comments, I was really surprised. Nobody rolled in and said, you got a bunch of girls' watches. All right, don't listen to that if they do. Usually that's the trolls. They roll in a little bit later after the video's posted, so there are probably a few of those comments now. But it's always nice to have a little bit of punch. And so the 40 millimeter Explorer 2 is going to give you that. So what I think you should do, get rid of the Grand Seiko, add the Explorer 2. All right, keep the Oyster Perpetual. I don't think you need to sell 2 watches. Hold on to that. In the future, if you want to sell your Oyster Perpetual, you can, but it's pretty clear to me that the GS has to go. And I think you picked a great watch in the Explorer 2 40 millimeter, you know, size-wise, function-wise, dial color-wise, thickness-wise. It's got that Rolex X factor. And again, you'll have your casual, high-end wearing watches in the Blancpain and the Tudor. Again, if you want to sell 2 watches, I would go with the GS and the Tudor. But again, it's going to come at a cost of brand diversity, and really going with Explorer 2 is going to come at that cost as well, but it would be one I would be willing to make. Viewer, what do you think? A lot of people are going to say, no, you know, you've got Rolex, you've got the GS, you got a lot of diversity in your collection, go with that. But again, it means coming to grips with the thickness of that Grand Seiko, and I can tell you don't like it, so you can find everything and more in the Explorer 2. I think that's the way to go. Thanks for your question, David. I appreciate it. Viewers, weigh in. What should he do? What should he not do? What do you think of my advice? Consider subscribing. Give this video a thumbs up. Take care, and I'll see you next time.